that you've sort of asked about. Can you just outline specifically your reasons behind the question on in-work poverty?
Yeah, sure, that's absolutely fine. I'm on the poverty committee, as you'll know, but as a member on that committee. But I also have like a personal interest in sort of picking apart like some of the various different aspects of it. In work poverty, I saw sort of parts of that growing up as a child. I mean, my mum was, she was working 3 different jobs as a single parent when I was a child. So I remember kind of like going to work with her. And I remember how much we kind of had left over and whether or not we needed a cup of sugar or some milk or some bread that we may have, borrowed from a neighbour or, and it was, it's that type of thing that I want to kind of dig down into personally. I mean, there's another interest in it as well in terms of in-work poverty. I mean, I asked the Treasury Minister and the Enterprise Minister the same question. And I asked them the same question simply because very often you get back an answer like, oh, it's not my department. It's a different department that you need to talk to. And I think that how departments actually sort of collaborate and speak to each other is extraordinarily important. We talk about single legal entity, single operational entity all the time. And very often when there are problems that arise or, issues that might come to light, it sort of boils down to sort of like this lack of interdepartmental or cross-departmental working, So my question in relation to in work poverty is about how the departments sort of think and how they dictate how a subject matter relates to and affects the department, but isn't in a list of responsibilities, in their general remit. In work poverty, I asked the question to Enterprise, but asking it to Treasury, they have social security in the job centre in their department. However, that's changed. I mean, what is the perception of the responsibility to those in work and in poverty for Enterprise still? Is there still a responsibility in that department? Should they be working cross-departmentally still in that capacity? Or has that kind of like, because the job centre has joined social security, has that kind of like now, is that no longer their responsibility?
Is this also a question of relativity? Because, of course, on the island we discuss poverty in different terms as other places in the world, of course. Now, you talked about it from a very personal experience. How much do you think that, or what level of importance do you think that plays on the island when there is a lack of sort of third world perceived poverty?
Well, having... I'm from half Belizean, which is something I'm very, very proud of. I mean, my mother's Belizean. I've spent quite a bit of time out there, so I understand what sort of developing countries suffer in relation to poverty, and I can kind of compare it to some of the research that perhaps I have done on the Poverty Committee and elsewhere in relation to poverty here on the Isle of Man. We don't have a measurement for poverty on the Isle of Man. We can't define it. And, talk about relative poverty and sort of various other different sort of ways of looking at poverty. But actually, if we don't know what it means to the Isle of Man and we don't have the right figures for the Isle of Man and we don't have a definition for the Isle of Man, in the same way that they do in the UK, like the Social Metrics Commission and the Legatum Institute in the UK, they've been trying to kind of like pull together a metric to understand the landscape of poverty and what poverty means right now. And they've been doing that in the UK, and they've been working with the Office of National Statistics to change the way that the statistical analysis is actually done. They've been talking to the Department for Work and Pensions over there to try and create some kind of like unity between themselves as an independent, thoughtful think tank and the Department of Work and Pensions as the government entity, to try and sort of like make sure that the answers to these questions can actually that people are actually being seen to, and that there is a direct effect.
So how important do you think it is then on the island?
Extremely important. Yeah, extremely important. I mean, in work poverty in the UK, the Legatum Institute and the Social Metrics Commission, they've actually published this month a report, and their report sort of reflects the one that they published last year in September. But what they've done this time around is they've actually provided a level of statistical analysis of what they've gathered so far. In work poverty in the UK, there are 10% of those in work fall below the poverty line, according to these new figures. Now, that's people that are in full-time work, but of course there are other different types of work that people might attain. So part-time work, it's 58% of people that are working part-time, so like my mother was when I was a child, working part-time, that are only able to work part-time because they're a single parent or for whatever reason that might be, and they are, they're in poverty, or they fall below the poverty line over there.
Do you think that's a fair reflection on the island as well then? Obviously they're UK statistics.
Potentially. I mean, we don't have those figures over here on the Isle of Man. I mean, unless we picked up that metric and then placed it on the Isle of Man, which is perfectly, capable of doing, like we're able to do it if we wanted to, if that was our choice to do it, if it was government's choice, more importantly, to do it, then yeah, and it would be extraordinary for the Isle of Man because we'd have a full understanding of exactly what these positions are, and such a level of information as well that can come from that. I mean, 70% of those that are jobless are in poverty. So a lot of poverty kind of is directly related to what kind of work you are obtaining and what situations you're in. And
our employment levels, though, are notoriously better than the UK. We have a very high low unemployment rate.
We do. We have an extraordinarily low unemployment, but that means that we can then focus on those that are, because that's statistics, that's analysis, that's the type of thing that could feed into a project like this, for example. Those figures are helpful because then we can start focusing on those that are in part-time work, those that are in sort of full-time positions, because that 10%, if that exists here on the Isle of Man, that's still quite a high figure. Really, we need to know exactly what that is. Is that persistent poverty? Is that something that perhaps people are falling in and out of, or like just to understand what the situation is and how it sort of runs forward? I mean, there are a lot of kind of other different issues that people face as well that have a direct effect on in-work poverty, like, for example, inescapable family costs, like disability, like mortgage debt, like, for example, obviously a lot of people are sort of working and then they also have to pay for childcare costs, for example. So all of that would kind of like factor in. So of the total resources that are available, you take into account the net income, other resources, sort of weekly available assets, debt, inescapable family costs, recurring housing costs. So like the roof might need to be fixed, or the boiler might need to be fixed, or might continually need to be fixed, or whatever it might be. Sorry, excuse me. And childcare costs, extra costs of disability, social care costs, travel costs as well. And that will kind of make that sort of total available resource that one might understand. But I suppose like the information that seems to be what I'm looking for in asking a lot of these questions is I'm trying to find out what the departments currently know, what surveys they have available to, because that's another question that I asked to the Minister for Policy Reform. I asked what surveys have we got, what information, what data have we got, right the way across the board. I want to see everything. I want to see what's gathered where. I want to see the whole picture so that I can have a look at it and I can scrutinise it as an MLC. I feel that's my responsibility to do so. Over the course of the summer recess, it's important that we're picking up stones in departments, looking at what's underneath them. Does it work? Asking questions about it, because that's part of our role. And I firmly believe that that's part of our role.